Welcome back. Just last year, South Sudan gained its independence from its northern neighbor, the Sudan, but unresolved issues, most of them over oil rights, has led to a series of clashes along the border. Each side is claiming to be the victim of the other's aggression. The violence has spiked so much that the South Sudanese president returned from an official visit to China earlier than planned to deal with that situation. Just this weekend, the Sudan arrested a South Sudanese soldier and 3 foreigners for engaging in what they called suspicious activity. So here with more on the border crisis and what can be done to help the innocent people who are suffering there is Randy Butler. He's the CEO and president of the Institute for Sustainable Peace. Randy, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with what your organization is all about. Tell us what you do.
Sure. What we've been working on, and particularly with Sudanese leaders for about the last 5 years, is mobilizing a network of leaders who are both equipped for and committed to the very long-term process of peace building.
And what exactly are they fighting over? We know it's oil, but what about the oil and where it's going is the main source of this conflict?
You know, this really is a terrible example of the curse of oil in the developing countries. One of the biggest problems is the comprehensive peace agreement that was agreed to about 7 years ago that ultimately led to the referendum and the partition sort of kicked the can down the road of, well, how are we going to share the oil revenue? Because the government of Sudan before partition was like 80% dependent on oil revenue. 75% of the oil is in the south.
So basically at this point there's no established agreement.
They have no agreement. And what complicates the issue is the only transportation of that oil is through a pipeline that runs through the Republic of Sudan from South Sudan.
That tips the scales. That's
right.
Let's talk about the humanitarian efforts there. It's such a difficult crisis, hundreds of thousands of people starving.
That's right. And that's one of our great fears, is that the plight of the people in the Nuba Mountains will be forgotten in this increased mobilization and rush to war that seems to be ongoing in both South Sudan and in the Republic of Sudan.
So what's at stake there, and how can that be resolved so that humanitarian aid can be brought into the Sudanese people?
Once again, they need to open up safe corridors and so that the people of the Nuba Mountains, who are literally at risk of starvation, can be reached and helped. But again, this is within the larger context of they really need demilitarization of that entire border region that is part of the conflict, because they haven't even agreed on what the borders should be. And there were mechanisms in place in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, but they've pretty much been ignored in terms of how to resolve those issues.
We talk about crises that are happening in many countries, but we don't normally talk about the Sudan. Why does it not get as much publicity as other areas in crisis?
That's a great question. I think that part of it is, one, there may be a little bit of Sudan fatigue. We've been hearing about this crisis for quite some time, particularly as it related to Darfur. And it is on the other side of the world. But I think we also forget that even at one level, of course, it's millions of people at stake who really live subsistence lives. But it's also a strategic area, because the Sudan, the former Sudan, bordered on 9 different countries. And that's a very important region for the rest of the world. There are a lot of strategic minerals there. China is very much in place there. And it's important.
Good reason for us to keep our eyes on the situation there. Randy, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And for continuing coverage of the border